right, so how's everybody doing this evening? Yeah, said all right. With the homework, the main goal, it was an exercise for you to start thinking within the framework that for everything good that you do, you have to take something away, or everything that you do, you have to take something away. A lot of you wrote good ideas. Some of you were very passionate about the things that you wrote about. Some of you wrote extensively long papers, and I'm very proud of that, and very happy about it, excited. Some of you did some extensive research, and that was good. Yeah, and it's a very good first start. So as we move along, I'll get more critical on the papers. Take my comments because I'll be looking for that the next time as we move further along. All right, so it's a good first start. If you have any questions, you come see me before class, or I'm here for a couple minutes after class, and so forth and so on. All right. Tonight's lecture is going to be on administrative responses to market failures. This is the linchpin between public agencies and how they respond to major, what they would call market failures or financial crisis, market failures that cause financial crisis. All right. We are going to look at Keynesian economics, which is really when there is a market failure, a major one. We're talking about the economy. The theory or the concept that the government can intervene in the free market, help mitigate some of the financial challenges that are out there. And we'll be more specific as we move along. Has anyone heard of Keynes? John Maynard Keynes? Has anyone read about him? No one's read about him?
The road is flat. I think that's been discussed, so it's like a beginning that I was reading it, but I've never heard it.
Was he like a philosopher or something?
In a way, he's an economist. All right. So what we're going to do is tonight, what we're really going to do is go over some of the product of his work, the impact of his work. All right. Are there any questions about the homework before we go forward? Yeah.
Some of the,
No. Oh, it's you.
right, I insist. Some of the readings are starting to confuse me. It's kind of starting to overlap in the way that it's getting confusing. Yes.
Okay. Want to explain? Elaborate.
Basically, a lot of the terminology that we're coming across, some of it, of course, I recognize from the lectures. Other portions of it, I don't quite recognize, and I don't quite understand some of the examples that are in the reading that have to explain what the concept is. So it's
Okay.
becoming a bit confusing.
Okay. Good.
I know that probably you go over the readings with us to try to help me to understand a little more, because I'm tackling this for myself for the first time. This is like a new exploration for me. So I like, things that I really don't understand, I'm gonna highlight it, and maybe you can explain it if we go have like 5 to 10 minutes to go over certain parts of the reading before we go into the full lecture.
Okay. What else? What other questions? There should be a lot. I mean, we just started the class. Right? There's a lot of terminology right now.
When it comes to the philosophies, right? Under each category, they had like, for instance, the group that you gave us last week, definition, the leads, general, the way it's categorized, as I'm reading the passages, right, it's becoming more understandable, but looking at this grid, how would we put these, I guess, definitions, the categories, as far as using it when we, maybe doing, I guess it would be, I know on the exam, right? So how would, you would ask maybe like a question and give an example from each philosophy?
Well, it's more understanding the basic premise of each philosophy. Can anyone tell me neoliberalism? What's the basic premise?
Individual responsibility.
Is it? Which one's the most, it talks about individual responsibility?
Libertarianism.
Libertarianism. What's individualism? What does liberalism say? Libertarian. What does libertarianism say about the individual?
Individual responsibility.
Limited government enforce policy. The government is the
So the state should only provide
But-
national, like, for different, the defense, Department of Justice. See, this is what I'm saying, it's like a lot of different parts of it.
Could it be that a person's life changes are simply the result of market outcomes?
You read it in the PowerPoint last week, and this is the key right here, right?
Because it's like I'm trying to like break it down simple, so I can understand it with using the words.
Okay, you go see.
But I thought that like neoliberalism and libertarianism, libertarianism has a strong belief in individual responsibility. But neoliberalism, it emphasizes it, but it goes into the market outcome. It leans more towards,
Looking at the difference in people's livelihoods.
it's not, it doesn't strongly believe in individual responsibility.
Yeah.
But it emphasizes it some and leans more towards like the outcome of markets or the market outcome. I know what I want to say.
Jasmine is jumping out of her seat. Go ahead.
Jumping out of
She was like this.
Is libertarianism equal individual responsibility, is equal outcome, and neoliberalism is equal opportunity but not equal outcome? Or is that correct?
Equal outcome is not part of libertarianism, nor is it part of neoliberalism.
It's a strong belief of individualism.
It's a strong belief of an individual, right?
Right.
Their economic,
And their response.
how they,
And and the response.
Yes.
Right?
well, listen.
I'm beating myself up.
Okay. We can do two things here. Now, we're reading our notes, we're looking at the lectures. The answers are right there, but I think there's a deeper question here. How do we take these key terms and relate them to the bigger picture? Right?
Okay. Yeah.
What I want to let you know, we're starting a new class, right? This is a new field of study.
Yeah.
We're learning all these key terms, right? They're confusing. How do they relate in the bigger picture, right? On one hand, when we learn about libertarianism, it talks about strong individualism, right? Someone's economic outcome is really based upon their skill, their determination, how much they work. And there is no real concept of social justice. An individual's outcome in life is really based upon their skill. Libertarianism, neoliberalism, it has some strains that are similar to libertarianism. But for the most part, there's a major difference. It talks about equal opportunity. Because in the market, a free market environment, it concedes that fairness is not always there.
No, right,
Equal opportunity is not always there.
right.
What the neoliberalism is saying.
That's, yeah,
Neoliberalism.
right, it says it right here.
Collectivism, the next step, says we're not just talking about equal opportunity, but we're also talking about equal outcome.
That's right.
Equal outcome talks about income, housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But what we're going to start doing is saying, okay, what is the deeper meaning of this? If we have these beliefs, any one of them, we're libertarianism, if we're neoliberal, we have collectivist philosophy, underlying economic philosophy, what does that mean in terms of developing an economic policy?
Okay.
We have to build upon this knowledge base, but without even understanding the difference between libertarianism and neoliberalism, let alone collectivism or socialism, how can we start to pick apart these different economic systems or different economic philosophies and really get a good hold of what they mean or what these terms mean? You see? And the best way that I can say this is that education is a process. When you read things, if they don't make sense to you up front, on one hand, that may be a good thing, especially at this level, the master's level. Not that you're completely lost, but that it's a new term.
Yes,
It's a new concept.
it is.
It's something that you have not saw before. But I will tell you, underlying these principles and these concepts and these philosophies, you've heard some of this stuff before. You're just not at this moment in time. Some of you are, because I've seen in your papers, you're able to relate it, different theories, concepts. But because you're not at this moment, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The point of this class is to teach you how to relate these abstract concepts to real actual policies that have been made, that will be made in the future, but also to be able to point out when people speak about economics, economic theories, philosophies, what should the central bank do? Should they raise interest rates or lower interest rates? What should the federal government do? Should they do deficit spending? Should they address the deficit right now, stop spending? Or should they go into more deficit? What you will start to do is say, well, there's more to that question. What are the ramifications of them addressing the deficit right now, or not addressing this fiscal crisis that we're having? Or can they do both? What we're going to start to do as we move along, your knowledge base, based upon definitions, based upon how economic policy works from administrative level, meaning how can the government impact the economy? How does the government impact the economy? You'll start to get a better grasp and a better handle on this. But that's not the only thing that we're studying here. We're also studying the real end result is how do you understand these external variables to be able to understand the budget of your organizations. How do they operate in this environment? So you, as the chief executive, the CEO, can sit at your desk, read the newspapers, see what's going on, look at your budget from this year, last year, make proposals that are in line. Because a lot of times, one of the things that we talked about before, a budget is also, for the most part, a reflection of social values. You're going to be making hard decisions. So, what I will do is at the beginning of the class, we can talk about some of the key terms, some of the things that are stumping you in the reading, some of the things that you don't understand. And I'll go back, and we can highlight some of those things. My job really is to take these readings and to apply some of these abstract concepts to what's really going on in organizations and in the world, to bring them to life. Really my job is to break down these readings for you and apply them to things. But one thing that I find is that making the link between abstract theory and concept in real world application, especially when you're in the trenches working with these organizations every day, it doesn't always happen right overnight because learning is a process. But we can get you there, and that's the purpose of this class. So we, at the beginning of the class, we can spend about 10 minutes going over some of the reading. But this is what I need from you. We can have a little bit of organization. Each person, if you have a question, write down the question, right? Don't come in here and just read the same sentence that was there and don't read the slide. Do some research. Take the time to try to apply it to something that you read in a newspaper, a current event, a pundit that you hear on TV, something. Apply it to something. And tell us why it either applies, is applicable, or not. All right? That will help you work through some of this and think about it, but also will give us something to really to go over. All right? It brings another dimension to it, and we will do that. All right? Are there any questions?
In the reading, right, at one point it said, the role of public finance is to underpin the citizen-state relationship. Can you explain that?
Okay. One of the examples that I gave last week was talking about Plato. He got arrested, right? For corrupting the youth, right? He was offered the opportunity to get away, to escape. He did not escape because he said he had an obligation to the state. Right? This was the first formal writings about a citizen's, especially in democratic societies, relationship to the state. But as we went along in the lecture, we started talking about individuals in society having a say in what government does, what they spend revenue on, education, housing, policing, things of that nature. In a democracy, there's a democratic process to passing a budget. It's a public policy. Public policy is who gets what, when, where, and how. The relationship between the budget, are you asking the relationship between the budget and the citizens? Are you asking what that is?
That's what it said.
Because I'll ask you,
Public finance
yes,
is to underpin the citizen-state relationship. So the underpin part is what I'm trying to understand with public finance.
okay, I would flip that around and I would say you answer that question. You tell me what you
So
think it is.
the relationship between citizens and the people that run the government. Is that what it is? That's where I'm confused. That's what I'm asking that. State relationship, the relationships that people have when it pertains to government and finance.
Easy answer is yes, but if I say yes, I'm still wondering, are you grasping that concept?
No, that's what I'm asking you that.
Okay. Well, let us go through the lecture. Let it sit on your mind. Let that question sit on your mind. And as we move along, the question that I want you to answer, does the state have an impact, state spending, the money that government spends, have an impact upon the livelihoods of citizens in the country?
Yes.
That's the answer. If we put it that way, that's it. Yes.
More key terms for you to learn. Market failure. It's a situation or in any given market, there's an imbalance in the supply or demand of that product. Either there's overproduction of that product, or there's underproduction of that product. Market failure. Imbalance between supply and demand, overproduction, or underproduction. It's too much, not enough.
So that's what it is, and market failure is just too much or not enough.
That's a simple way to break it down. Yeah, but it gets more complicated than that. Because you ask yourself, why is someone producing too much of this product? Or why is there not enough of this product? And that's where it gets complicated. Yes.
And market failure, the way it's presented is tied up to the offer and demand, to the theory of offer and demand in economy.
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand.
Yes, yeah, it is based upon supply and demand. Equilibrium means that at some point, suppliers and buyers come to an agreement that this is the price and this is how much we will supply. Market failure is saying that somewhere that for some reason, there's an imbalance between the suppliers and those who are demanding that product.
Is that linked to the production possibilities curve, like could that be an example of market failure?
No. The production possibilities curve is how much, well, if you take it
At the extreme point.
at the extreme point, yes, how much of something is produced. And at the extreme point, we could be talking about pollution, we could be talking about education, something of that nature. That would come into play if you're talking about something like international treaties, Kyoto Treaty, greenhouse gases, or something of that nature. But it can be applied to a lot of different things. But for this purpose, we'll keep it at the step of mismatch between supply and demand. Now, for the government to intervene in the free market, it has to have a justification. And that justification is primarily based upon market failure. It has to be deemed necessary for this, I would say, the smooth function of society. Examples: roads, schools, public safety, military, so forth and so on. There's still a piece missing here, so if you're not grasping it right now, that's okay. We're still walking through. Main thing is constant market failure, mismatch between supply and demand, negative or positive externality, and because of that mismatch, there has to be, that's a justification for government intervention into the free market. Now the question is, what types of goods have a mismatch between supply and demand? And what is the basis of government justification for intervention in the free market? Monopoly is one. when there's only one supplier of a particular good or service that exists. Typically, for a lot of services that the government provides, they are the monopoly provider of that service because the startup costs of that service are so great that there's a disincentive for private institutions to provide that service or to make the upfront investment to provide that service. And there is a tremendous need for that service. One example that we all know of is the United States Postal Service. When it started, that was the link between the country. Every community in the country utilized that service. Every community today still utilizes that service, but we have options now. We have UPS, FedEx, DHL, but the mighty, almighty email really put a hammer on the Postal Service. But in the late 1700s, early 1800s, all the way up until the 1900s, Postal Service was the #1 link between the nation. Thought it was vital. And they had a monopoly on postal services until the 1970s. I know FedEx and UPS, I think also DHL, some of these companies started in the 1970s. One of them earlier than UPS earlier. But to the 1970s when these companies rapidly accelerated their growth. Regulations changed, yes.
Okay, like when it comes to those businesses, what is DHL? Is that like a foreign-based company? I never, like.
Google.
Huh?
Google them and look them up.
All the others, I said, DHL, I don't know. I mean, it's here.
It's a private company. It's supposed to be a package company.
I know.
At that point, you can look them up. Tennessee Valley Authority. It was started in the early 1900s, 1930s, to electrify and provide power to a large swath of territory in the southern United States, including Tennessee, Mississippi, Kentucky, all the way up to West Virginia, northern parts of Georgia. This is a large area that was impoverished. But the cost to provide electrification to this area was so great that no private companies wanted to make the investment because they didn't think that they could recoup that investment. So the Tennessee Valley Authority was created to electrify, bring water, to stimulate economic development in this area. The reason why I bring them up is because they are the sole provider of power for this region. They have a monopoly on the area in terms of power, but they're providing that monopoly so that they can recoup the funds that it took to electrify the area. A couple months ago, President Obama, he proposed to sell the TVA, parts of the Tennessee Valley Authority, to local, state governments, local governments throughout the region, which is interesting because this Tennessee Valley Authority has been around for quite some time, and it's an institution. It's one of the most powerful institutions, public institutions, in that region of the country. Any questions?
What would be the purpose of President suggesting that?
To sell off the Tennessee Valley Authority, because the philosophy is it's not the region has been electrified, and the federal government does not need to continue to hold on to that responsibility. State and local governments can be able to can manage that at this point. Because the costs have been placed into the electrification, the infrastructure is there, and they can probably better manage it because they're
And
closer.
maintaining,
Yes.
like in cases of Mike Valley, Long Island, and PG&G and Jersey.
Easy, what is it?
Public service,
Yes, it's the same type of philosophy. You know, for the most part, many of these, like this, your Edison, AT&T, a lot of these were public agencies at one point in time because the infrastructure that it took to set up the telephone lines, a lot of the electric infrastructure was massive. So it needed government subsidies. But as the companies moved on or have developed over time, they're quasi, they're private and quasi-public because they have public protections. A lot of them still have monopolies over an area. A lot of states have moved to do what they call allow other service electric providers and utility providers to come in. However, those
But you
are still using the
charge
same
like
lines.
that,
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a way, in theory, it's more introduce more competition into the market. Market failure. So one externality we talked about is monopoly. Another type is market failure. Where the cost, or externalities, where the cost of the production of a particular good is not completely borne by the producer of that good. The cost of a particular good is not completely borne by the producer of that good. Thus, it's not also borne by the purchaser of that good. Society bears the cost. The classic example is pollution. I have up here a beautiful truck, black smoke. Truck is carrying cargo from the port somewhere from one location to another. In that transaction, the producer is getting paid for that cargo. The truck driver is getting paid for transporting the goods, and the person who purchases the goods and sells those goods is they're getting their profit out of it, and the individual who actually purchases the good at the very end is getting the benefit out of it, right? However, have you ever been sitting at a stoplight, had a truck next to you, black smoke starts coming out? Even if you have the air conditioner on, sometimes it can creep in there.
Yeah.
In that transaction, that individual is not bearing any benefit from the production of that product or the sale of that product. But there's a negative externality there. Now, I have a photo of Los Angeles, or the Los Angeles area, basin. It's known as a very smoggy area. I grew up right up under this mountain. And I'll tell you, sometimes when you look up, you can't see the mountain. Small, particulates in the air. Within 50 feet, if you live within just 500 feet of a highway, your children are much more likely to have asthma and other respiratory diseases, which is going to impact their health all through their life. And in the end, a lot of times it leads to lower life expectancy. However, many of the people who live right near highways, especially those children, are not benefiting from all the cars, trucks that are passing by. Some factories, or many of times, can be located near water sources. Many lakes, streams, rivers, waterways have been polluted. Dumping waste into the water, which people can't see. These are negative externalities, meaning that the producer is making a profit and the purchaser. However, if that producer had to invest more in cleaning up the emissions or the bad byproducts of the production of that good, the price for that product would be higher. And because the price of the product would be higher, most in theory, less people would purchase that good. Now, in this, there are a lot of goods that are overproduced because the producer is not paying the full cost of production. In a way, society is bearing that cost. All right? Unknown individuals in society. All right? That's a justification, that's another justification for government intervention. Market failure. This will all come together as we go along. Definitions. Public goods. A good is considered a necessary public good, but in order for the government to have a clear justification for the provision of that good, first, consumption of that good needs to be deemed necessary. But once someone produces that good, or once that good is produced, there's no way to stop the individuals that did not pay for that good from consuming that good. Something that's produced because someone has invested something in it. Once that good is produced, there's no way to stop individuals that did not contribute to the production of that good from consuming that. Second, the benefits that are derived from that good is very, very virtually impossible to calculate just how much that person benefited from that good. Yet, you know that the individual does benefit from the production of the good. The key here is the non-excludability factor. Once the good is produced, you cannot exclude individuals from consuming that good. And the individuals that do consume that good, it's virtually impossible to calculate just how much of that good they need to be paying for or not be paying for. National defense is a prime example. Once it's provided by the government, or once it's provided, everyone in society is going to benefit from it. Because national defense is going to be for the entire country, so all the people within the country are going to benefit from it. But it becomes virtually impossible to determine just how much each individual in society is going to benefit from that good.
At that point, we can say it's gonna be direct benefit or indirect benefit.
Yes.
Direct benefit from that point, the company that manufactures that good, and indirectly, in this case, us, citizens of the nation.
The citizens of the country that's provided that good. Everyone within that boards are gonna benefit in some way or another. This is one primary example. Another is clean water. Everyone has to drink water. At some point or another, some people don't like water, but at some point or another, everybody's gonna have to drink water. It's not clean water around, it creates other problems. Gone over this in some of my classes. Concept of bounded rationality. We're still going over terms here. All right. Who's played the prisoner's dilemma? You play out here, smiling. District attorney. He walks into his office, he got 2 cases sitting right there on his desk. 2 people, 2 friends. They got arrested last night. Robbery with a gun. Caught red-handed. Problem is, neither one of them have confessed. And the person who was robbed can't completely identify who is the stick-up person and who is the lookout person. Which brings other questions for the prosecution. But the more cases that they prosecute, the more they get to move up. They get a raise, a bigger office, more prestige. Maybe they can run for office one day. Now, let me ask any of you. If you had a friend, really good friend that you grew up with, that did something bad, say you at work, would you tell on them? They got you the job. Would you tell on them?
No.
No.
Depends.
Even if you know you can get fired?
I'm not gonna say.
Integrity.
Who won't tell?
I won't tell.
Why won't you tell?
Because integrity is everything, and trust, you know. If you go down, I go down. Because if it wasn't for that person, I wouldn't be there anyway.
Yeah.
It's all about relationships, you know, I'm not,
Integrity and trust. What about the integrity and trust of the organization?
I have nothing to do with that when it comes to my good friend, it's just me and you against the world. I wouldn't tell.
You against the world, like Tupac, huh?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say if I go down, you go down, because I don't really allow people to jeopardize my situation because they got their own mess. But I
So
wouldn't
are you
tell.
saying that you won't tell? Or
I
you
wouldn't tell, but if it was brought to question to me, I would say I didn't.
So you didn't see it,
So you
but
lied.
you wouldn't tell, but at the same time, you won't allow somebody else to take you down.
No, I
Right?
don't want that.
So it's kind of wishy-washy then, right? What if somebody puts pressure on you? Would you tell? They said, look, we find out later on. If you knew,
How you gonna find out?
Exactly.
No.
how are you gonna find
They
out?
always
You
find
don't
out.
Well, you don't know.
Who else wouldn't tell?
I wouldn't tell them it's none of my business. Let the police do their own work. They have investigators that investigate
Right.
themselves. I'm not an investigator.
Get paid.
Why should I get you to do your job and don't get paid for it?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
my
but-
job.
but-
You can't pay for it.
No, but he said,
Investigate the person who committed the crime, not me.
no, but he didn't go that far. He was saying, if it was done on a job, then you're gonna lose your job behind it. Like, you're gonna lose your livelihood. You ain't gonna be able to pay for your kids, your bills. Your kids gonna suffer from this. Because, that's what I'm saying, if you don't speak up, you're gonna lose your job. Because now you're associated with this criminal.
I'm singing like
You know what I'm saying?
I'm singing like
I got Steve's answer. But tell.
Hey, listen. Hey, I didn't tell him to. Hey, I ain't tell him to do it.
Exactly.
I can't control. Thank you for getting me a job. God bless you. But I didn't tell you to do what you did. And if I'm aware that you did it, and they come now, if you come at me about it, I'm aware that you did it. I'm gonna say, and you put my livelihood on the line. I'll be like, well, I'm sorry. You did it. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm not gonna let my kids suffer because you did something.
See, some jobs is damned if you do, damned if you don't.
But how does
So
it-
even if you get to that point of saying, okay, if they come to me and they ask, I'm not gonna say nothing.
The military do you
But
like
the
that. Let me
person-
tell you, the military do you like that. Like what he said, I was in there. The military will play that game with you.
Yeah.
And you're very close to people in the military. I mean, you live in the same quarters with them. So you know people, you know what they're doing. But if it get rapid, then commander put pressure on certain people. You're like, well, let's see, look at Sergeant Carrington, yada, 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 yada. We know that it's something that private so-and-so.
Sergeant Carrington is saying that he's gonna tell.
Exactly.
And he's got the reason.
They already know in the military, you
Yeah.
can't hide stuff
Thank
like that
you.
from them.
So
That's
would
why
you
they
tell?
have inquiries and court martials, so it's not like you can sit there and say, no, that didn't happen, because you're in trouble.
I was
Yeah.
too. Once they come to you, you
Yeah.
already know the answer.
Yeah.
If someone on the job, I'd rather you not even tell me nothing about it.
Who else?
I wouldn't say it.
What'd you do?
I said it depends.
Depends on what?
The situation. Like, if I was to lose my job.
The repercussions of this job.
You will lose your
If
job.
you wouldn't lose your job, but you know they're stealing, you wouldn't tell.
No.
Okay, good.
If I knew and I told you not to do it, I'm telling. Like if I told you, yo, don't do that, you don't get caught up. Don't do that.
Please, can we go back to, what was the question? Because it seems like we adding and taking away, and now I feel like, what happened? Well, maybe I made the wrong decision, so what is the question? Can we go back to what the question was?
Let me tell you this. Out of everyone sat here from this vantage point, and I saw you were the first person to say, I would not tell.
But I want to make
So
sure
pressure was
I heard
going
the right. No, I heard the right question because it was, if you saw somebody do something, would you tell? That was
And
it.
you
all he said.
no, if it was your friend, you got the job for you.
No, right. If you saw somebody do something, it was your friend who got the job, and your job is, you might lose this, a chance that you might get fired, right?
Yeah?
Okay, that's it. But when people say, oh, it depends, and is it okay to add all that other stuff in there too?
Okay, look.
You can.
So now,
That's a question.
we're back in the morning. DA has these two cases.
Yeah.
Early in the morning, the people went, they got arrested for robbery last night. Like I said, strong case, there's just a little bit of a gray area right there. Person who got robbed can't really finger the person who actually put the gun to him and took the money, right? That brings questions as to can they really call the people out in the lineup. But there's a trick. There's a trick. If he or she can get one of these two to say that the other person did it, then this is a done deal. Like I said, they have ambitions, right? On the other side, these two kids, 17, 18 years old, been friends for a long time. They're homies. They grew up in the same neighborhood, right? They grab each other's back. If, by some chance, they both keep quiet, they can maybe get a year. They'll probably get a year, right? If they both rat on each other, they both get about 10 years because it's a done deal. But the DA knows this. If he or she can go to one of them and say, look, I will let you out today. Right now. You can go home right now. That other person's going to get at least 5. They'll get 5, maybe 10, because they got a confession from somebody who was there. So, here's the score. Typically, if both confess, they'll both go to jail 5 years. All right? One keeps quiet, prisoner B keeps quiet, prisoner A confesses, he goes to jail for 10 years. Because the other one walks free. If they both keep quiet, They both get 1 year and, you know, they're homies, right?
What they get 1 year?
Yeah, for what?
For what?
For what?
Just
Being
being
Somebody,
homies.
somebody got robbed. Someone had a gun.
But the man, whoever got robbed,
Hey,
he
look,
can
That's
identify
why it's not,
nobody,
that's why
so.
it's not 5 or 10 years, because
Okay.
it's not the possession charge, it's just the charge of.
Excuse me, listen, all right, you're forgetting that they're both in custody. Someone's been robbed.
Uh-huh.
There's charges pending.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Right
it's
now.
speculation.
You don't have to deal with
Allegations, speculations,
Let
that's
me
what
ask you
it
this
is.
question.
If the man can't identify nobody, it's
Right.
speculation.
So let me ask you this question. You're both sitting in different rooms. All right? You're both sitting in different rooms.
I'm not saying no word.
He got thrown out.
Okay, but can you trust that other person's not saying a word?
Yeah, if you want to ride or die, yeah.
Not if they under pressure though, you
You
don't
don't
know
know
that.
That's why the whole code is that you don't do.
You're willing to
nothing
believe,
with
you're
that.
willing to risk, you believe in that person so much, you're willing to risk being in there for 10 years?
If that's my ride or die partner, yes, I'm gonna trust that partner.
I don't think so. It's
Now,
not-
if, maybe y'all never had people that had your backs. I had people that had my back.
But even
No.
even if you decide not to and they do, you still have to take the responsibility of your own actions. If that person decides to say, oh, I wasn't there, they did it, you still have to take responsibility for the part you played in, even if you did do it.
I wouldn't sit up in no DA office saying I played the part.
No, I'm saying, he's saying if the other person
No, what I'm
tells, I
saying
have
is
to
this.
trust that they're
And
not.
I was gonna tell him that he's
You
lying.
can keep quiet, right?
Especially if
Keep
the man
quiet.
can't, especially if the man can't identify, oh, he's lying.
How do you know
Y'all put
that?
pressure on him.
You don't have that
Yeah, you
information.
don't know
Yeah,
that.
you don't have that info.
But you don't know, he's saying if the other one's in the room,
All you
how
know
do
is
you
that
trust
you
that?
trust this friend.
I trust,
And you
I
trust
just
him so
trust
much
that
that you're willing to
person.
go to jail for 10 years.
If we
for
did
that.
some crime together, and we've been down together for a long time, and we did some crime, I have.
Yeah, don't, just stop right there.
Okay, so let me ask you, let me ask you a show of hands. We have some very strong beliefs here. Who would trust their friend that just robbed someone? So much so that they'll risk going to jail for 10 years for it.
People did.
I ain't gonna lie.
I ain't ready.
You think you trust them until they turn around and they get the pressure now because they
If it's not ride or die, yes. The only if it's that person. Now, if it's somebody, even
There
if
you
I
go.
go up with
So let so let me ask
Yeah,
you,
but
do you believe that there's honor among
Bunch of
thieves?
people with.
Yes,
Yes, there's honor. You
yes.
believe there's
I
honor.
have two situations right now where,
Who believes that? Raise your hand if you believe that there's honor among thieves.
It's no saying that says it's not, but you would have two partners that will go all, like with the movie we seen last night. The wagon, whatever.
Yeah, were they in jail?
Okay. No, but it's showing you,
They were getting
but it's showing you loyalty. It's about loyalty, you understand?
Right.
So if you have two people, if you out doing a crime or something like that, if you feel like you can't trust nobody, then you do it by yourself. But if you have a partner that you have did things together for a long time, neither one of them are not gonna tell on each other.
But you have to believe that.
it's rare that they won't. Let me see. It's rare that
How do you?
they.
No, it
How do you?
happens. People do snitch on people.
That's
You
what I'm
under
saying.
pressure,
It's
they
rare
won't-
that they won't tell.
People do, but I know,
Okay, listen. I can see that there. I can see that there.
You see what you said?
I think you misunderstood what I was saying.
There is some.
No, nobody, that's your belief.
Can I say something about
Yes.
to me, my belief, my opinion, any individual that submits to criminal activity or behavior, you're gonna have to pay somewhere down the line, and you have to take accountability for your own self. I don't care who you are, you gotta be accountable for what you do, plain and simple. And like, cornerback, you're gonna defend your own self, you're gonna take that stand and be on your own, you have to do that, no matter what you say.
Self-preservation will kick in.
Yeah.
It kicks in at some point during the right?
I'm not saying that people won't tell, but we talking about what we trust. I mean,
Principal agent theory. Principal agent theory, and the concept of boundary rationality. All right. Now, on one hand, We can go on a spouse that we trust, our friends. We trust. But we never know what somebody else is saying or doing in another room, right? That's a fact. In terms of this game that we just played, the Prisoner's Dilemma, most of the times, one or both are going to rat on each other. If you don't believe it, go down to one of the local county courthouses.
Why you go down?
Just sit in one courthouse, one criminal courthouse, and look at all the plea bargains. They're not based upon somebody's thing, but they're based upon testimony. Or somebody signed their statement, I did this, and such did this. Hopefully, we'll get less years than if we would have went to trial. Over 90% of criminal cases are handled that way in the country. All right. But it also shows why groups in society are not always able to work with one another. Why groups are not always able to bind together to do what will collectively be in their best interest. Because after all, this is democracy. All right? If we live in a democracy, why don't the society come together and everyone get free health care? We all need it. Why can't we all come together and have free higher education? Why are we taking student loans? Right? We all need it. Why do the MTA fees keep going up year after year? Right? Why don't we just, why isn't that free? Right? We're a democracy, we can vote for these things. But society doesn't work that way. And one of the reasons is because groups, individuals and groups in society, you do not always know what the other individual or group is always doing.
Right.
Now, in theory, you should be working together. But in practice, it doesn't always work that way. Because there's mistrust. Unless you have information. Because information is power.
Yes, sir.
But if you don't have the information, you're not in the position to have all the power. You're just trusting. But this is the key. There's always an incentive to undermine the other. There's always an incentive to undermine the other. So you could be the trusting individual or trusting group, but there's really not an incentive to do that. Maybe collectively at the end you take it to an extreme, but in the short term there's always an incentive to undermine the other. Machiavelli in The Prince talks about tactics, political tactics. How do you get from aspiring to be in power to actually rising to power and then staying in power? And in that, he articulates a lot of tactics, devious tactics. Now, we say in our nomenclature, Machiavellian tactics. That means someone will do whatever they can to rise to the top. But there are incentives for people to use Machiavellian tactics, or groups to use Machiavellian tactics. But this is the thing. In democracy, in this public policy process that we use to decide who gets what, when, where, and how, there are incentives to learning the boundaries, the rules, and use it whatever way possible to get to the top, or at least to get what you want. Yes.
I was almost finished right now.
It'll be loaded. God bless you. There was a market crash in 1929. Right? Black Friday. The indirect cause of the Great Depression. Cause of market failure, speculative frenzy. I mean, the market could never crash. It's always going to be good. Financial manipulation, and that there are very complex marketing strategies and financial tools that were created. Overextending of credit. Everyone got credit, even if they had bad credit. What I mean by bad credit is they couldn't pay back the loan the previous month, but they got another one next month. I'm going to show you a little bit about this crash in 1929, and then we'll go from there.
A sense of there is no limit, and that all this expansion, this success, this advance, we're not really going to be able to pay for it. Now, of course, that didn't turn out to be true. You could see the crash. Why do you think they called it a crash? I mean, it's really an airborne collapse metaphor. You can't crash if you never left the ground. And it's not like a crack up where you're on the ground and you collide into something else. Rather, it's, the plane fell.
The 20s had been so prosperous in so many places, not in the countryside. The farming industry was in very bad shape in the 1920s. But certainly in the cities, it was very prosperous. People were making fortunes on the stock market. And then all of a sudden, poof, it went. I mean, people, economists, very serious economists, have been saying that we've reached a new level, a new plateau of prosperity in this country, and we were never going to go back. And then the crash happened.
All through the summer of 1929, there had been ominous rumblings. For months, unemployment had been rising. Automobile sales and department store revenues had fallen off sharply. Across the South and West, farms were failing in record numbers. And still on Wall Street, the delirious optimism continued, undimmed. On August 27, 1929, the Dow Jones average reached its all-time peak. The Dow Jones average reached its all-time peak as an army of frenzied buyers descended on New York. Desperate not to miss a single day's trading,
Always taking out
swamping the hotels, camping out on swamping the hotels, camping out on the street. Desperate not to miss a single day's trading, swamping the hotels, camping out on the street in front of the stock exchange, and in the tiny graveyard of Trinity Church on Broadway, where Alexander Hamilton lay buried.
What caused the crash of 29 was excess speculation. What had happened was that the American economy as a whole had begun to cool starting in 1928, and the Wall Street economy disconnected from the underlying real economy and became a speculative bubble. And this fueled this speculation that just took off and took off and took off until, again, one day, somebody woke up and said, this has gone too far. There's an old story about Bernard Baruch, that he had his shoes. Sorry about this. And took off until, again, one day, somebody woke up and said, this has gone too far. There's an old story about Bernard Baruch, that he had his shoes shined every morning by the same shoe shine boy. And one morning, the shoe shine boy gave him a stock tip. And Baruch went to his office, called up his broker, and said, sell me out. And the shoe shine boys are giving stock tips, it's time to get out.
As summer turned to fall, the mood changed. As the stock market did. As the stock market did, then rose, then lurched downwards again. Investors grew increasingly uneasy. In September, an economist named Roger Babson sent a wave of fear rippling through Wall Street when he warned that sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be terrific. But most experts brushed away any concerns. Stock prices, one man declared, have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau. And then the bomb fell out. On Wednesday, October 23rd, 1929, the first waves of panicky selling began to drive down the price of blue chip stocks, like Westinghouse and General Electric. The following morning, the fear turned to panic, and brokers began unloading margin accounts at record speed. Stock prices plummeted signally across the board, spurring the rush of sell orders from terrified speculators still more. As anguished shrieks rose up from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the visitors' gallery was cleared. In less than 2 hours, nearly $10 billion invested in stocks was simply wiped out. Outside on the street, crowds massed 6 deep in front of the stock exchange, while hundreds more stood in shocked silence on the steps of Federal Hall. Newspapers would later try to describe the uncanny murmuring sound that echoed off the stone facades of the financial district. Sound that echoed off the stone facades of the financial district. It was a collective moment of horror and grief, and stunned disbelief, rising up from thousands of ruined, frightened men. The biggest crowds gathered outside the House of Mourning, desperately hoping for a miracle. Cheers broke out when word came that a consortium of bankers had agreed to pump hundreds of millions of dollars into the stock exchange to shore up the faltering market. Word spread that once again, the day had been saved by the House of Mourning. But the day had not been saved. On Friday, with the market apparently stabilized, the banks withdrew their funds. The following Tuesday, October 29, 1929, known forever after as Black Tuesday, another tidal wave of selling hit the exchange, and this time, no one came to the rescue.
Nothing could stop it, and just people wanted out. And this was in the fall. Most crashes tend to be in the fall. And I think that, again, it's human psychology. You tend to be more cautious in the fall. The speculations of summer, it seems to have been, and suddenly when the chill winds of October come, you wonder if it's such a good idea, and you try to get out. And too many people do that at once, that it causes the market to drop, which causes more people to want to get out, and suddenly, the snowball rolls down the hill.
Hour after hour, the market continued its descent into chaos and pandemonium, as stock prices simply collapsed under the torrent of panic selling. And desperate brokers fought and screamed and trampled one another to get out.
16 million shares traded that day, which seems like nothing today because we trade 16 million shares in the first 5 seconds of the business day. But the trading record set on the day of the crash, the 16 million shares, was not vested until 1969. It was 40 years before the New York Stock Exchange traded more shares than it traded on the day of the crash. The top tickers did not stop running until 7:45, when the market had closed at 3:30, I guess.
In the worst single day in the history of the New York Stock Exchange, the market lost $14 billion in value, bringing the week's loss to more than $30 billion. 10 times more than the entire annual budget of the federal government, and far more than the United States had spent during all of World War I. Worst hit in the short run were the thousands of small investors who, believing that everyone could be rich, had bought stock on margin, sometimes borrowing as much as 90% of its book value. In a matter of hours, in some cases minutes, they had lost everything. Their life savings, their houses, and their dreams. Financiers who had not been wiped out tried to put a brave face on things, insisting there was no cause for alarm. Prudent investors are now buying stocks in huge quantities, John Jacob Rascott told the New York Times, and will profit handsomely when this hysteria is over.
Wednesday, October 30th, 1929. Mr. Rascott was asked if he believed that the decline in the stock market would have great effects on business. He answered that he did not believe the effects would be other than temporary, lasting probably 2 or 3 months, and that he did not believe that the effects would be drastic in other than luxury industries. The New York Times.
But others feared the worst. The present week, one newspaper editor declared, has witnessed the greatest stock market catastrophe of all times. It would The present week, one newspaper editor declared, has witnessed the greatest stock market catastrophe of all times. It would take a decade and a half for the American economy to fully recover.
I think the reason the crash lives on in the American folk memory, although there aren't many people alive today who were adults when the crash happened almost 70 years ago now, but what followed the crash, the Great Depression, which permanently scarred the American psyche, and we remember the crash as the beginning of the Great Depression, although in fact the two had nothing to do with each other, or very little. But that's why I think the crash became such a benchmark, because it was this very sharp line between the prosperity of the giddy cocktail party of the 1920s and the awful depression of the 1930s, and the bread lines and the apple sellers and the village riots and what have you.
Get that light on your way out. Okay. All right. Good video, interesting, huh? Great Depression, the stock market crash. These are indelible moments in this nation's history. Because before this crash, and then after the indirect Great Depression, the world had never seen really a depression, an economic downturn of this magnitude that would last for so long. And because of that, nobody even envisioned that the Great Depression after this market crash would last for that long. All right? But there are also a lot of parts to this video that we deconstruct. Well, because of this, during the Great Depression, the population was about 120 million that time. Right now, the United States population is about 314 million. All right. But out of 120 million, there are 13 million people, about 11% of the population, 12, that became unemployed. Directly related to the Great Depression. However, 34 million people were impacted. It's 1 in 3, about 1 in 4 families in this country lost a wage earner. Some lost 2 wage earners. Industrial production fell by 45%. Things that are being produced fell by 45%. Homes being built fell by 80%. 1920, banking sector was about 50% of the economy, and that sector fell by 50%. 25% of the U.S. economy just wiped out overnight. 5,000 banks went out of business in 1929, between 1929 and 1932. About 11,000 out of 25,000 banks that were in the United States failed. It went under. Now, if I were giving this lecture in 2006, the class would probably be like, oh, wow, shocking, right? But we witnessed something like this.
Just recently.
2007, 2008, 2009, it's still playing itself out.
That's right.
Especially in the housing market.
Housing market, the banks,
Yeah.
all these large ones, for the most part survived, all the small ones bought up, right? When the stock market crashed, the wealthy people, Warren Buffett, they went to town, they bought all the stocks, and they talk about this on radio, TV, right? We heard that's how some of the bankers were doing right there, right? But also, what are some of the things we saw in this video? What are some of the things that started, that led to this?
Overextended credit.
Yeah. How'd that play out? What kind of credit? How does it work?
Probably, well, within that, around, and after that, credit card was around, completely unsure of that, but they might have been credit on people's houses, knowing that they couldn't afford to make the payment, and they might have recertified their loans and extended that credit out.
More like consumer goods, the stores, the retail outlets, right? When somebody got the shoe shine, what did and the shoe shine boy gave him a tip? What did he say?
Got out, get out. When shoe shine boy give you stock tips, it's down the road.
Yeah.
Now everyone's an expert, right? Overheated. But one of the things that happened in this, crowds that gathered outside of on Wall Street, right? The trading house. The bankers rolled up, right? J.P. Morgan and Company. Thought they're going to save the day, right? Everybody was calm. What happened?
They changed their mind.
They changed their mind the next day.
So what really happened?
They
Why did they
decided-
change their mind?
Because they decided that once all of the trading be done again, probably that this was a bad investment. They were just gonna basically end up collapsing the market again.
They were going to collapse it, or was it
No, I
already
mean,
collapsed?
The people who were trading, it was already collapsed, but people started trading as if nothing had happened.
What separated these bankers from the rest of the thousands of millions of people investing?
They still have money.
They still have it.
They still have money. Okay. What else separated them?
When people buy the stocks,
What else separated them?
Wise choices.
How do they make wise choices?
By looking at it in a whole. and
What's the difference between a wise choice and a not so wise choice?
The heat of the moment.
Information.
Heat of the moment. That's good. That's
Information.
good. Information.
They started listening to people saying that the bubble was eventually gonna burst. And started to pull out early.
Maybe they saw that the bubble had already burst. Let me ask you this question, relating back to the prisoner's dilemma. Who would they represent? The bankers.
The one who's gonna tell.
Any other ideas?
Repeat that again.
I think they would.
The DA,
I think they
Say it again.
the DA,
Why?
because the DA basically has information that the other parties haven't seen yet.
Don't have. Information is power.
Right.
We have information, you can make decisions. Smart decisions. Not heat of the moment decisions.
So, taking that, we can say that the decision made by the government to bail out the company, the motor industry years ago was a bad decision.
You're talking about GM when
the big three.
you're talking recently in 2007?
It was.
That's up for interpretation.
They paid the loan back.
That's another discussion. I'll say this, that GM was able to go to the federal government, get investment so they can retool and they continue to stay afloat. Because that's also, it's more of a political decision than economic, right? Because if GM goes down, Ford goes down, then what happens to,
Everything else starts to collapse around it.
well, Detroit, Ohio, and all the other industries that are affiliated with them, right? So that's an economic decision, but it's more based upon a political decision. In this situation here, I relate Prisoner's Dilemma to the DA, to the bankers, because the bankers have inside knowledge. Wall Street or the market would not crash if everyone trusted each other not to pull their funds out. Because collectively, they could have kept the market afloat. In theory, that would work. In practice, that doesn't work. Right? Yes.
But we have banks that went out of business. Like, I don't understand if the banks pull out, aren't people trading through their banks anyway? So if you pull out.
They're trading through brokers. Banks have larger amounts of money and they put it in the stock market, but if they lose enough money, they don't have enough to cover the money that they have out there actually in society. So for every dollar probably that a bank loans out, they probably have 30–40% of that actually in cash, and they take that and they invest it, hoping that's going to grow.
So the banks that made it were the ones that stopped loaning money out?
No, the banks that made it were the ones that were large enough.
And
And that, yeah, to survive, and that had that money, yeah. Just like what happened now, it's one of the big banks that came out of this on top, right? The Great Depression, you recognize these photos, many of them, left an indelible mark on this country. A lot of pain, suffering, poverty. Women with her kids, trying to figure out what she's gonna do next. Scraping by, looking for any job that they can find. Little kids playing. Human beings are resilient. You adapt to the environment that you're in, right? They don't know anything better. They may, but they still have fun, right? Wow, this one right here. He's not having so much fun. That melon, like probably one of the best tasting melons they ever tasted in their life. They remember that. But I tell you, this photo also represents the situation which this country was in and is in today. You got people from all different walks of life. We don't share what we have. It's a bad situation. That thing right there, that melon, is pretty good. I tell you. The irony, unemployment, right? But you got this photo of a successful American family, the world's highest standard of living, right? The 1920s were booming, the 1930s were not. The unemployment line, aerial photo. People want to work. lot of people are dressed in nice suits, jackets, but there just isn't work. It's not like there's not things to do, but it's not a paying job.
Wouldn't that would have been a good time to become a cop, there's been a lot of crime.
Can't
You need to pay the police force. Where's money for the police force come from? Taxes. Where taxes come from?
We the individuals, we don't have no money.
They don't look like they're ready to commit crime. They look like they're looking for a job. Something to do.
They'll rise and on West Third Street.
Yeah, after our forces, you know, taking so many people at this time, right? And it's funny, you guys have mentioned government responses, governmental responses. What can the government do? Right. Soup kitchens. A warm, hot, mostly watery soup. Tastes good. Get you what you need. New York City, informal housing, called the Hoover Bills. You go to parts of New York City, talk to people, they say, I'm poor, I'm impoverished. These buildings, things like that. But in the United States, New York City, you don't see these typically anymore. You don't see them anywhere, really. Shacks, that are wood, tin. Go outside this country, they're everywhere.
If you go deep down south, though, like, you gotta go deep down and then you see.
Deep, right?
Yeah.
Closer photo. I mean, on one hand, you say deep down south, yes, but also deep down south, housing's a lot cheaper, right?
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of times people live a lot better.
Right.
So it's an election, 1933. FDR says, we gotta do something about this. It's gotta be a new deal. What's going on is not good enough. The government can't just allow this to happen. We need to intervene, do something. We'll play just a little bit of this and move forward. No, I'm just gonna, you go and watch that at home. The New Deal was radical, especially at the time, because the government had always been using, still influenced by libertarian economic philosophy, to stay out of the free market as much as possible. But these social challenges, they created not just a need, but society demanded something be done. The previous president, Hoover, his teaching, the philosophies that taught him about politics, about economics, said the government intervenes, it will just make things worse. FDR said, look, we have social issues, we have major social issues, even though the textbooks that we learn from say, do not intervene, something has to be done. So he created this New Deal, programs and policies, meaning that the government was going to take steps, proactive steps, to try to mitigate the pain and suffering in society. One governmental program out of many, one governmental agency is called the Works Progress Administration. Started in 1935, in 6 years. It employed about 7.8 million people at some point. It was initially financed about $4.8 billion, which is about $6.4 billion in today's dollars and cents. which was about 135% of the federal government's revenues in 1935. That means the government borrowed large amounts of money to finance these New Deal projects. And the reason why the government financed large amounts of money is because there was a new theory. It's called Keynesian economics. It said the government can borrow the money, put the money back into the economy, get people to work, it will stimulate economic growth. And this was the first time that was done on a massive scale.
So the German Keynes said he came up with this concept?
Yes, Keynes developed it. Writings. A list of some of the things that were done. Rural roads, over 400,000 miles. Urban roads, about 45,000 miles. School buildings, 4,383. 30,000 received improvements. And garments for needy families, 222 million. School lunches served, 23 million. This was one program that did a whole host of projects throughout this nation that still stand today. That still stand today as a testament to what this nation can do collectively. Puts its mind solving challenges. Some photos of the work that's done. Making garments. We said 222 million people, garments were made. Road works being done. Imagine, you see the unemployment lines? People get a job, something to do. Contribute, they can take care of their families. But it's not just that. They're doing something that the nation needs. These are major roadworks projects, runways. These are dams and electrification projects. But at the end of the day, that paycheck, your work is worth something. It made an impact. Without the government's intervention, this wouldn't have been done. You still have more pain and suffering. Right? For the most part, for public administration, the Works Progress Administration, it was influenced by the dominant theory of the day, which is called orthodox administration. Hierarchy, bureaucratic, highly centralized, economies of scale based upon scientific management. For those of you who just started the program, we will go over this in the introduction course. Alright? Underlying this theory, it primarily says that if the government is tasked with completing something, it needs to create the agency, and they need to carry out that policy, or create the agency and do all the work. Now the most recent recession that we had started out with the housing bubble. From 1995 to 2006, median price of housing all across the United States went up by 76%. Just in 2006, the last year before things turned around, 1.7 million new homes were built. 10 years, homeownership rose by 4.8%. It's about 5.7 million new homeowners in the country. But also the key here is that almost $1 trillion were pulled out of the equity in homes, meaning that people had a house, they purchased it for a simple, particular price, but over time the value of that home rose, so they were able to pull out equity. Almost $1 trillion. Now the challenge there, the problem, is that what it took to produce that home, nothing really changed. The market value went up, but the actual use or value of it is really created on the books. But the usage of it, the hard usage of it in society, didn't change. But the key here is that you also have a trickle-up effect, because as property values go up, taxes go up. Tax dollars going into state government and local government coffers. And what do they do with that money? They start spending it on programs, social programs, public programs, anything really, if they can, if there's a need for it. How this works, so when you build houses, you employ people. Then there's ancillary businesses, like your Home Depot, and all the other retail stores that are out there, right? Your IKEAs, people get new cars, real estate, it's cyclical, right? It's the economy. But once this stops, it impacts everything else. What it also does is have a negative impact on the tax revenues that are coming in. These are jobs, 2000 to 2012. This is 2007, and these are where we're losing jobs in 2009 and 2010. And right now, the unemployment rate's back down to about 5.8%, something of that nature. A lot of times, when people account for employed, it's not full employment. The wages aren't as high, so forth and so on. But the government was back in a position where it needed to do something. So before Bush was out of office, he had to inject about $700 billion into the economy. This theory of deficit spending, borrowing money, placing it back in the economy to mitigate the fallout effects of the recession, is based upon Keynesian economics. But then after Bush went out, Obama came back in. He also advised that they still needed to inject more funds into the economy. Another approximately $700 billion in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. This is all based upon Keynesian macroeconomic theory. And the real question, the real challenge is this. If they didn't take these steps, I'm saying Bush and Obama, at this time, the recession could still be going on. We learned from the previous recession, 1929 and 1930s. If we didn't learn from that lesson, we would still be going through a much more protracted recession today.
This is the Marketplace Morning Report. I'm David Brancaccio. In just over an hour and a half comes the government's count of people who had and did not have jobs last month. One thing you can say about the last few months with the labor market, at least job growth has been steady, but it has not been spectacular. 175,000 or so new jobs a month. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman now on what it's like to be without work for 6 months or more, and what it's like to go back.
Chip Cosbeth is 46. I met him at his doctor's office after a checkup covered by his new employer's health insurance, which is really good. Cosbeth is a mental health counselor. Until last year, he worked with criminals at the Oregon State Penitentiary.
They're in the midst of psychosis, in the midst of behavioral problems, and it's a prison, so you've got to have everyone remain safe. It was incredibly stressful.
He left that job last fall for a different kind of stress, sitting at home, anxious and depressed, sending out resumes for 8 straight months. Finally, he landed a job at an agency serving low-income patients. He took a $10,000 pay cut and started in July.
I love the job, and being able to just come in and feel competent and feel capable, it's a wonderful thing.
Economist Gary Burgess at the Brookings Institution says the long-term unemployed are least likely to get a shot at any job opening.
Because employers are more willing to take a chance on people who've just recently been laid off or just recently have entered the workforce.
And don't have the taint of long-term joblessness sticking to them. There's something else that happens to the long-term unemployed, says psychology professor Don Lynch at Unity College.
A lot of our own personal identity is tied up in our work. When that's lost, it takes part of us away, and then coming back can be pretty intimidating.
Professor Lynch calls it a kind of post-traumatic stress disorder. Chip Cosbeth says he's got plenty of that after his bout with unemployment.
I still have a lot of lingering anxiety around having a job and doing it well.
What about your bosses? I mean, do you tell them you're appreciative of working again?
Yeah, I think my boss is kind of tired of it. But that's okay, she will be hearing it. I feel like I have something to offer people.
His effort and enthusiasm just to be working again. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
Okay. So, what I want you to start doing, we started off the class, there are a lot of questions about what is libertarianism? What does it mean, right? What is the context? What is neoliberalism? What does it mean? What is the context? What is collectivism, right? But I want you to start making the linkage between, if you believe in libertarian economic theory, what types of economic policies will you implement? Would you create job programs? Yes, no, maybe so. If you believe in neoliberal economic theory, would you create new schools? Would you create unemployment programs? Yes, no, maybe so. If you believe in collectivist economic theory, the same thing. All right? But also, with this, there's another question. Does government spending or government policy impact the lives of individuals? Or is there some point at which there is a justification for individuals, for the government, to intervene in the free market? Does it matter? And from that point, what is the justification and how? So as we move along, we will start to see how different services that are provided by public agencies and that extend to nonprofit agencies, there has to be some sort of market failure right there. Either there's an oversupply or undersupply of that good. And then we see why is there an oversupply or undersupply of that good. And then how are the organizations that have been created to supply that good or to mitigate the supply of that good, how are they financed? How are they managed? All right? With that, I'll let you go for this evening.
He just don't seem like he's serious when he's scared. It's just, to me,